Welcome back. We last left off having just finished the construction of this fancy little violation of natural order disguised as a box. This is a pocket dimension. As mentioned previously, these things are heroically scuffed, and I'm unreasonably excited to share all of the nonsense they let you pull, so while I get started with building out my new proto-colony, let's dive in, as it were. So, pocket dimensions. How do they work? First off, don't deconstruct the ceiling, break the walls, mess with the access point to the dimension, or destroy the object you used to create it. Break those rules and you will turn into a 5-dimensional tesseract spaghetti soup monster and the map will spontaneously delete itself. Beyond that though, anything goes. The object you used to create the dimension can be uninstalled, moved, packed onto caravans, or just left lying around with no negative effects whatsoever. The only thing you can't do with it is pack it on Save Our Ship shuttles, but that has to do with a mod incompatibility thing and isn't really the fault of the dimension in the first place. If you want to put things into the dimension, you can either treat the access points as giant drop pods and load them up from a menu, which is what I've been doing so far, or use a dimensional hopper with a filtered inventory to automatically load anything into the access point it's touching. You can also share power with them by connecting cables, and the game will treat them as the same power network despite being on different maps, which is just a neat bit of tech. Structurally speaking, the pocket dimension is one giant roofed-over room. Notably, the dimensional containment field roof doesn't count as a thick roof, so undergrounders won't be as happy as you might expect living down there, but on the other hand you won't get bug infestations, which seems like a solid contender for the best trade deal in the history of trade deals. You can also install your own floor if you don't like the one the dimension is made out of. So far, that's all fairly normal Rimworld behavior, but those are also the only things that are normal here, so hold on to your britches, this is going to get janky really fast. Let's start with something easy. Map properties. These pocket dimensions are map objects, and you can see them spawned in underneath your colony on the world map, though for obvious reasons the mod doesn't let you enter one with a caravan. They are also very weird map objects in that they are functionally immune to everything that can happen to a normal colony unless it happens to the map tile they're built on, in which case the effects will propagate down to the pocket. Other than that, raiders won't raid them, traders won't show up, drop pods and ship parts won't drop in on them, environmental effects like psychic drones don't trigger, you get the idea. For a lot of events, this makes sense because, well, explain how you would fly a drop pod into a pocket dimension. Go on, I'll wait. However, this immunity also applies to things that could logically still happen, like events, colonists or animals getting sick, and crops getting blighted. In technical terms, if the event has to be fired by a storyteller for it to happen, it can't happen here by default. Period. The game won't let it. Congratulations, we cured the common cold, and all it took was making, living in, and uninstalling an extremely blinged out bag of holding. Alright, so that's odd, but it mostly makes sense. Let's get weirder and start talking about temperature equalization. The pocket dimension has a setting that allows you to open or close a vent on the structure. Ostensibly, this is supposed to allow temperatures to equalize between the dimension and the room its access point is built in. That is very much not what happens. Instead, temperature management comes in two different flavors, screwy and extra screwy. Let's start with the merely screwy one, which is when the pocket dimension is in its minified item form. In this state, the dimension map is perfectly thermally insulated from the area the item is in, and no heat transfer takes place at all with the outside world in either direction, regardless of whether the pocket dimension has its vents open or not. This has some interesting effects when you take into account that the dimension in its default state is otherwise almost perfectly insulated. The game says it has an outside temperature of 21 degrees centigrade on the dimension map, and it will normalize to that if it's left undisturbed, eventually. But the effect is so slow that even things like the heat output from living ponds will accumulate over time and have a major impact on the average temperature of the space. It also means that a heat deletion setup is all but required for long-term residency in an uninstalled dimension, since running even a single cooler can build up enough heat to kill everyone inside the dimension before said dimension will reach a thermal equilibrium, unless you take proactive steps to solve this. Side note for those of you who didn't know, your fun Rimworld fact of the day is that ponds and animals output a very small amount of heat. You just usually never see it because the effect is dominated by other factors. To answer the obvious next question, no, you cannot use this to spontaneously ignite your colonists, and yes, I checked, it caps out at 40-ish degrees centigrade independent of the number of ponds you have in the room. Believe it or not, That's the less screwy option for temperature management. Placing the dimension item as a tile makes it worse. If you have the dimension constructed in a room somewhere and the vent is set to open, it will try to equalize its internal temperature with the temperature of the room the tile is in, like you would expect. And if you close the vent, this equalization will stop. Normally. The caveat to this is that when the dimension is placed, the outside map temperature in the map dimension will always map the temperature of the room to the pocket dimension it's placed in. This results in goofy situations where the vent might be closed, but the instant you construct a nutrient paste dispenser, or something Rimworld thinks is a 3-block thick wall, the outside temperature will start leaking in wirelessly from that structure, and that leakage is entirely independent of the vent settings because of how Rimworld optimizes its heat transfer calculations. As if this wasn't confusing enough, this mechanic doesn't transfer any heat or cold at all. So you also end up duping the temperature differential in the same way that an open door plus vent combo does, but this time by leveraging the liminal space between the fabrics of reality. So that's fun. What else can they do? Well, modern sci-fi literature has conditioned us to think that building pocket dimensions inside other pocket dimensions would result in all sorts of terrible recursive programmatic bull honky that would destroy the fabric of space-time, but that turns out to not be an issue. As mentioned earlier, all these pockets are maps that the mod stacks on a world tile, so you aren't recursing anything, you're just moving the door. In other words, you can stack these things like turtles all the way down and the game don't care a bit. That understanding does raise an interesting question, though. Can you put a pocket dimension inside itself? Programmatically speaking, there shouldn't be any reason why not, but the access point would have to simultaneously be in its minified and constructed form to feed it through itself, and that clearly isn't possible. We also can't caravan it or drop pod it into its own map tile instance because joining into a dimension from the map is forbidden by the mod for many reasons, and this is the principal one of them. To get around this, we would need a way to directly teleport items into the pocket dimension map without relying on the world map. Conveniently, Royalty introduces just that in the form of the Farskip Psycast. This is a level 5 Psycast that teleports the caster and either the contents of their caravan if they're traveling, or all pawns near them if they're on a map, to another friendly pawn somewhere else in the world. Most importantly for our purposes is that its destination lands on a map, not a world tile, so it skips any interdictions made by the Pocket Dimension mod on the kinds of interactions you can have with its map reference. The problem with this strategy is that Farskip doesn't let you select a specific map on the world stage, and the Pocket Dimension map object always appears under the map object you created it in. This is actually just a UI oversight on Ludian's part, but it's an understandable one since you aren't supposed to have multiple map objects associated with the same tile in the first place. Even if you pull every friendly pawn from the map tile and stick them in a dimension, the game will still say that there aren't any friendly pawns in your colony and refuse to let you warp. It just does not function. The workaround for this is obviously to get rid of the map you originally created the dimension in. There are a couple ways of doing this, but the easiest is probably just to clear out a pirate camp or use a long-range mineral scanner to create an ore blob mission, since both of those objects will delete themselves when you're done with them. The steps are pretty obvious from there. Drop or caravan onto the temporary map somehow, create your dimension on that map, uninstall it, and take the item form of that dimension with you when you leave the map tile. The deleted map object will expose the pocket dimension map reference, since that's the only thing there anymore, so you stick a pawn in the pocket dimension, have your Psycaster create a caravan with the pocket dimension item in their inventory, and then skip that caravan into the pocket dimension map. This approach won't work for me because I already created the pocket dimension on my colony tile, or for that matter, I don't actually have a Psycaster with Farskip. If I wanted to Klein bottle the dimension I made, I would instead have to cram everything I wanted to save in the dimension itself, make a caravan with the dimension item and my Psycaster, and a second backup caravan, get both on the world map, delete my colony, skip in with the first caravan, and then use the second caravan to create a new colony. I guess the last step is optional if you want to pull the ladder up behind you, but without any other friendly pawns to target with Farskip, you're going to be stuck in your pocket dimension forever, so that seems unwise. If you do opt to live in a Klein bottle dimension, having both access points at your disposal on the same map lets you do some interesting things. The first one is that you can now send items and power wirelessly between 2 points. This isn't all that surprising, it's just kind of a special case of an otherwise intended game mechanic. I guess you could use this for trapping prisoners in a way that doesn't let them break out of jail or something, but beyond that, practical uses escape me. What is less intended is what happens when you connect both ends of the wormhole together on the same power cable. I was hoping that this would glitch out and give me infinite power or something, and in my defense, there is definitely some weird dookie going on with the numbers there, but after thinking about it for a bit, I was just trying to make a perpetual power generator by taking an extension cord and plugging it into itself, so this was a bit of a silly goal in retrospect. The only thing of value I discovered is that you can exploit the temperature equalization properties of the access points to control the ambient temperature of the world, and in doing so, make a centralized HVAC system. All you have to do for this is stick a cooler and a heater in a small room with a blue access point, build a setup to leak temperature into the dimension, and then stick a differential amplifier setup with a door and a vent on the other side of it. The differentials are tiny, so it's very slow, but it does scale infinitely, and it's also just kind of fun. So anyway, back in the real world, mech clusters continue to be a heroically massive pain in the backside, and this one particular group is especially annoying because it has both a low shield to block incoming ground fire, and a high shield to block orbital strikes and mortar fire, and a bunch of mechanoids to lay down suppressing fire anytime I try and get close. A slow sniper push would eventually be effective, and that's probably the only safe way to take it out at this point, but the emphasis there would be on the slow part, and I don't want to waste another quarter of a year taking out one of these things. That's where the Fallen Empire comes in. I took a quest to create another giant monument and got a bunch of gold and a really nice textbook out of the deal, but that wasn't what interested me. Ludian knows that nobody is going to want to keep these useless structures around any longer than they have to, and for late-game colonies, the resources needed to make them are basically free, so they introduced a second part. Sure, you now get paid when you finish the monument, but now, if you let it get damaged, there will be a punishment, usually some sort of negative environmental effect or a raid of some kind. Now, normally you want to avoid those punishments, but the enforcement mechanism for this quest was instantly summoning a horde of extremely zesty megasloths, and, well, I don't think the mechs really liked it, but as for me, well, the Fallen Empire really ought to know better than to threaten me with a good time. Other than some particularly high-investment, low-return projects like installing fine stone flooring everywhere, the construction of my pocket colony is largely complete thanks to Ferret being an absolute giga amongst Chads and building the entire thing himself over the last year or so. The only thing preventing it from being self-sustaining here is the lack of any sort of food production because of how incredibly energy-intensive running banks of sun lamps and hydroponics is, and I don't really want to fix that yet. If you put a gun to my head and said, make it work, I could, but it would require either installing a Save Our Ship reactor, which is lame, or using a power-positive Riced chem-fuel loop, which is obnoxious to maintain and time-intensive for my pawns. Rather than do that, I would much rather take my time, farm out mech clusters for their power nodes, and show off royalty as much as possible, while I slowly transition from being an underground tunnel rat colony to a reality-violating one. To that end, it's time to start with some major expansions. I already have charge rifles standardized across my colony, aside from the rare few exceptions like Brendan and Dank ShamWow, who have special exemptions because they are my combat mage and anti-mech pawns, respectively, and we have started rolling out a royalty-exclusive kind of power armor helm called Cataphract for everyone as well, though those take a little bit longer. Cataphract armor is basically just power armor that comes with more defense, more movement speed nerfs, and a heftier price tag in exchange for a decent improvement in overall defensive ability. The suits themselves, I find, are too impractical to use in day-to-day operations at this point in the game, especially when flak vests exist and are good enough for all but the nastiest raids, but the helms don't have any penalties associated with them, so if you can, you really should have everyone wear them at all times. The gear situation may be doing well, but we're starting to run into limits on how stacked I can make my colony without doing some serious raiding. Both Royalty and Save Our Ship introduced a vast selection of new and improved Bionic and Architect augments, which is great, but they're also only useful if you can buy them, and I once again cannot, because I'm just the poor boy who can't turn half the map into psychoid plantations due to stupid things like seasonal weather conditions. More pawns would help with this, but I have majorly high standards for the kinds of pawns I want to recruit, so that is slow going, and getting things to help with both of those issues requires time, luck, and money, and we're currently batting 1 and 3 on those. Darling Randy must have been running a keylogger and feeling generous because not 2 minutes after I typed that, he got on the horde with Beth Jesus and worked out an agreement to Ramazon same-day ship me a bunch of mech nodes directly to my front door, gift-wrapped and ready to rumble. Regrettably, Randy is also a bit of a ditz and neglected to tell Beth that he wanted to ship them without the original factory packaging, so they sent the things as a complete set with the rest of the mech colony attached. Okay, cool, that's fine. Far be it for me to take up a side hustle in equestrian dentistry, but either Randy forgot my address or those Amazon delivery drivers have started taking proactive steps against package thieves, because rather than deliver the package at my front door, they instead delivered it through it. As you can imagine, this causes some issues in the farm plots, which are now an active battle zone subject to large amounts of incendiary weapon fire. For the record, everything I know about this game implies that this should have been impossible. These mech pods are programmed to spawn away from structures that your colony owns to prevent this exact sort of thing from happening, and the only raids that circumvent this are colony infestations and drop pod attacks, of which this was neither. I have no idea how this happened, but it's hilarious, and I love it, and despite it being weird, it's not all that dangerous, so whatever, we ball. Point remains, for the next little bit, quests like this one, that give me mech clusters with power nodes, but whose environmental effects don't do anything particularly dangerous, are going to become my bread and butter. My colony is strong enough now that rather than chipping away slowly at them, I can usually just snipe out some fragile, easy-to-hit nothing structure like a turret to aggro the mechs and then slug it out with them straight up, so cleaning these is pretty simple. You know, when my pawns quit whining when I tell them to do things that will save their lives. At least, grow up, you prima donna. I assure you, nobody cares about your hurt feelings and achy arm when we are actively under attack. With my new Pocket Dimensions amenities finished, and among them, my crypto sleep banks, it's time to show off all the fun tech I was foreshadowing earlier regarding prisoner collection. You see, contrary to what you might expect, I actually have quite a few prisoners. They're just all either terrible and or unrecruitable due to the unwavering loyalty mechanic. I think this mechanic is great for game balance. For the record, it's just annoying by design. Both of these are utterly irrelevant, however. We don't need these prisoners to be good, and we actively don't want to recruit them anyway. This is because of a special royalty trade caravan type called a Royal Tribute Collector. Unlike normal trade caravans, they sell nothing and will only purchase slaves and gold, but in return, they pay an honor to the person doing the selling. The returns on giving them gold are abysmal, and even with an endgame colony, gold sales are almost never worth it. Selling them captured prisoners, however, is extraordinarily lucrative. You get 3 honor per prisoner, and they will take literally anyone. Seriously, anyone. Unwavering, loyal pawn that is slothful, neurotic, and pessimistic, who refuses to do any work type other than watch TikTok reels all day and is so dysfunctional the only reason they're upright is a double-fisted yayo enema, also known as the average millennial. 3 honor. No questions asked. The Fallen Empire is an equal opportunity employer, and they are willing to put their money where their mouth is. Though, on the other hand, this recruitment policy does explain quite a lot of their issues, because if they're running their colonies with those pawns, it's no wonder they can't do anything right. Since I got my crypto banks up, I have captured 6 prisoners. All of them are useless, but for the low price of providing basic treatment and cramming them in a crypto sleep casket for 6 months before giving them a hit of yayo, I just earned 18 honor, which is an absolutely nonsensical amount of honor for the work I put in. That is 3 prisoners per upgraded orbital strike, something that in the base game is an ultra-rare single-use item you can only get from quests. And weaker. Even crazier, 20 prisoners is enough to promote a pawn from dirt under the Empire's boots to the highest level of royalty you can achieve in one exchange. And it comes with an orbital strike free. So yeah, we're going to be abusing the living daylights out of this mechanic once we actually get a humanoid raid that we can capture people from. Yeah, like this one. This one's perfect. My cooler was set to crystallize them all with extreme prejudice mode rather than just cool them down enough they fall over, and I forgot to switch it, so yeah, I didn't really get anybody, but this showcases the idea pretty nicely. Frost them up, drop them down, pick them up, and sell them out. It's as easy as that. The real battle is cleaning up the mess afterwards, because having a negentropic freezer is kind of not conducive to burning everything, but that is a job for free expendable labor, also known as all the people in my colony who really truly don't have more important things to do with their lives. Right after this mess, Randy sends me another gift-wrapped package of mech nodes in the form of an EMP dynamo hive that at least didn't drop directly inside my base. The pods are appreciated, but I am utterly reliant on electricity to do anything productive in my colony, so I have to scramble to get this sieged up and put out, and by the time my pawns are ready to engage, we only have 1.2 days left before it activates. I opted to do an aggressive slow push with snipers here, but there is a very good case to be made for burning some of those low shield packs and doing a frontal assault here. If I lose power, I also lose base cooling, And with that gone, insect hive swarms are back on the table, and my base is horribly designed for repelling those. The resulting fight is a lot more mobile than I would have liked, and a couple of the nodes proved to be unrecoverable, but I have so many snipers with such good aim that I can afford to be a tad sloppy, so after a good day or so of kiting and sniping, the mechs go down and the rest of the base follows soon after. The psychic droner after it, however, is a prime candidate for frontal assault. My pawns have somehow come to the conclusions that just because I have a bunch of thrombophore and plasteel in my stockpiles, it somehow entitles them to having gold-plated toilet seats and delicately cushioned battle armor or something. I informed them that no, actually their accommodations are perfectly fine and told them to quit whining, and in response the last few years have been a constant uphill battle wherein I'm forced to constantly beat the daylights out of people who are too stupid to not have temper tantrums in the middle of an active mech engagement. All that to say, the last thing I need is for them to have a valid reason to enable self-immolation via crippling stupidity, so I want this thing gone. As mentioned, this is where low shield packs come in. These are single-use wearable items that, when deployed, will create a 30-second long bubble of shielding that can be fired out of, but not into. At least not unless you're interested in taking explosives, in which case the explosion effect permeates the shield and still does full damage for some reason. Freezer boxes are excellent for collecting these from pirates, since pirates only activate them if they are engaged in ranged combat, and I can make a bunch more from salvaged mech shield modules, so they really aren't that hard to get a hold of, but they are only situationally useful for my sort of fighting style, and I haven't had much reason to use my stash of them just yet. Until now. To say that the mechs got mopped would be an understatement, though I do wish to reiterate, centipedes really need an effective HP nerf. I have endgame levels of DPS, and it still took a minute and a half of point-blank fire from a dozen high-skill, high-quality charge rifle pawns to mop up, what, 15 centipedes? It should not take one pawn with an endgame weapon over a minute of sustained fire to burn down a single enemy. I know 1.6 has some combat changes coming for charge rifles and charge lances, so I'm gonna withhold judgment for now, but really? Meanwhile, it's exciting times here at launch site, as I have finally managed to get a full harvest of psychite in. To be clear, I was never really suffering from a shortage of the stuff, and I have been making use of psychite off and on as a sleep substitute and mood buff for quite a while now. This is just the first opportunity I've had to bulk produce it for sale. Flake is a phenomenal moneymaker. It's expensive, lightweight, and easily sold to just about everybody, and in maps where bulk crop production is an option, it tends to form the backbone of my economy. It also is great for artificially buffing the moods of noble visitors, because again, we don't really care about them, and if they develop a dependency, and they probably will, oh well! That isn't all that's going on, however. Now that I have everyone geared up and my pocket dimension is no longer burning a hole in my advanced component reserve, it's time to start plugging yet another resource sink, the Bionic Revolution, which is like 3 times as expensive as it used to be. Royalty adds a ton of new parts, and many of them are just straight upgrades with no downsides whatsoever, and it's time to start cashing in. My first colony-wide upgrade then isn't eyes or hearts or stomachs or things that might seem immediately obvious, it's a royalty prosthetic called an aesthetic nose. On the surface level, this seems like a stupid upgrade, since noses don't affect a pawn's ability to do anything, and they are so fragile that losing them in the base version of the game is practically a rite of passage for any pawn that sees sustained combat. It's just kind of inevitable. No sane person would ever care about noses. My pawns, however, have a very different opinion. Not having a nose, or more specifically, having any sort of facial disfigurement at all, like missing a body part or a scar, imposes a -15 social opinion debuff on the pawn when they are viewed by any other non-kind, non-aesthetic pawn, and it negates any passive bonuses from the pretty or beautiful traits, which are worth +20 and +40 respectively. The scale ranges from negative to +100, so those are pretty big swings. Why does this matter? Because pawns who like each other are more likely to form successful relationships and stay in them, and less likely to get into stupid matches in the middle of combat because someone just had to open their fat mouth and insult someone's grandmother's crochet patterns or something. I've had this happen twice on this run, and both times it resulted in one of my pawns being downed and a second heavily injured before the raid even started. So that's it. You all lost your right to interact with people in ways that offend me. Deus Goose has decreed that you will all now stop treating each other like and if I have to make you all irrepressibly horny to make that happen, I will. Of course, it isn't all just noses. Royalty adds a bunch of dimensionality to these upgrades, and they allow you to create hyper-specialized pawns for various tasks, in addition to giving a bunch of new useful passive effects. This is arguably one of the best parts of the DLC, in my eyes. Sure, more stuff, more gooder is fun and all, but from a mechanical standpoint, endgame colony management is kind of boring on a macro scale. There's no real downside to having all your pawns do everything unless there are quality-specific outcomes that you want to farm the extreme upper ends of, so I at least always end up with a couple of dedicated crafters, a dedicated artist, and then basically a soup of interchangeable bionic lads in power armor doing everything else, and that isn't a system that really encourages individuality. Royalty doesn't disincentivize this strategy, so much as it offers better alternatives in the forms of royal titles, psionics, and bionic upgrades that fundamentally alters what roles your pawns are suited for. Now, instead of a standard bionic payload, you can give them upgrades that improve their ability to do just about anything far better than the average pawn, but limit their ability to do everything else as a consequence. This lets single pawns take on hyper-specific functions, and in my mind at least, makes fishing for good recruits more enjoyable since there are now good reasons to recruit and build outside of the metal-clad, mentally robust meat biscuit archetype that I normally go for. All that being said, my first round of functional upgrades goes to one of my crafters. Purple Fire is a slowpoke body modder with a passion for crafting, and in my eyes that means there is no reason to deploy him in the front lines unless the colony is actively at risk of collapse. We haven't had any deaths yet, but we also have had some mighty close calls, and he's not the one I want to be rolling the dice on. With that in mind, his implants are designed to optimize his crafting output, and nothing else. To start with, both his arms are bionic for the crafting speed increase. He won't be in combat or regularly exposed to EMPs, so I can put in a learning assistant to help him retain level 20 crafting, at the cost of him being stunned when hit by EMP blasts. Body modder plus a sedentary duty cycle means his mood is already going to be fantastic, so I can afford to also put in a circadian half-cycler, which removes the need for sleep at the cost of the pawn not getting any positive mood busts from having a nice bedroom. I also throw in a nuclear stomach, which will effectively quarter his need for food, and a pain stopper. I can hit him with an EMP to down him if he has a mental break, and he won't be fighting, so the pain stopper really doesn't have much of a downside here. On the other hand, the nuclear stomach means he will quite regularly have to deal with cancers in his torso, and while they are harmless with good quality medical treatment, which sounds weird but is true, I don't want the pain from them or his chest scar to impact his performance. I also get him some lungs, because famously the only correct treatment for mild asthma is to surgically transplant 2 left lungs removed from 2 different prisoners in a broom closet by a cyborg using random weeds. At some point, I'm gonna come along and finish the upgrades with all the stuff that everyone will be getting, but those are lower priority, especially since Fire won't be fighting. Next to get this treatment is one of my newish recruits called Paige, who, now that she's gonna be doing anything worth mentioning, I renamed to Nikki. Nikki here is pretty unremarkable as pawns go, but she does have a dual skill and double passion in cooking and planting, which makes her a perfect second candidate for augmentation. Like Purple Fire, she has no business being on the front lines. Her payload is a little bit different. She gets the same nuclear stomach, half-cycler, pain stopper, learning assistant combination, but instead of 2 bionic arms, she instead gets 1, 2 legs, and 2 new augments. The first is a field hand, which massively improves crop planting and harvesting speed at the cost of a hit to mobility, and the second is a gastroanalyzer, which is a nose implant that improves cooking quality. Normally you would want 2 field hands for a fully dedicated grower, but the half-cycler comes with a pretty substantial hit to consciousness, and the bionic arm is needed to compensate for the manipulation debuff. A third pawn and another recent recruit by the name of Dukid with the really excellent combination of fast learner, great memory, and a double passion in mining gets to be my dedicated miner, and is given 2 drill arms, a circadian assistant, 2 bionic legs, and the rest of the usual stuff. Hopefully this guy will be able to relieve Saya and Paxer of their responsibilities, since they are also 2 of my best builders, and I would really rather not have them running around punching rocks when they could be stacking them instead. Dukid's member name, well, welcome to the colony Gunjar. It's really nothing personal, I just made a promise, and we all have to make sacrifices here, and your dignity happened to stand up on the chopping block. With enough power to sustain a couple of full-time grow beds and the basics of production infrastructure done, I can start shifting large chunks of my colony over to the pocket dimension. Crafting, smithing, tailoring, artwork, recruitment, doctoring, and cooking tasks are obvious contenders for this, since all they really need is a stack of raw materials and a place to work with their practitioners to be effective, and I get a substantial speed increase by moving them, since now my pawns are no longer having to work in a freezing cold environment. All that's involved for transitioning these is moving the resources and pawns that go into them, and then breaking down or moving any of the old setups. I already had Ferret install a kitchen, a jail, and a machine shop in the pocket, so that's easy. Once I tame myself some other meat-efficient animals like horses or ibexes, meat and leather production likewise becomes trivial, since all that needs is food, which I'll have, a cook, which I also have, and a pond set to auto-slaughter the mature animals. While yes, this is kind of in principle breaking my no repeating tech rule, reactor setups are just kind of ideal here because I can sell the leather for profit, use the meat for food, and then repurpose all my grow zones to produce cash crops instead of rice or something. On the other hand, some things will still have to stick around. Mining is obviously not possible in a pocket dimension, and deep drilling will require scanners that, again, can't be built in a pocket, so I still need to maintain at least some presence on the map if I want to extract resources from it. Raid defense, trading, and quest completions will also have to take place on the main world stage as well, which means things like bedrooms, storage areas, rec areas, and static defenses still have to stick around. Though with storage areas in particular, all I really need to keep around are things that I want to sell, eat, or use as weapons, so a lot of the horde can be moved anyway. Getting everything sorted out there is going to be quite an adventure, but all that and more will have to happen in the next episode, so for now, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.